地里forever. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Our God, you reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. You are the everlasting God, the everlasting God. You do not faint, you won't grow weary. You're the defender of the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Whoa. Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Who am I that the bright and morning star would choose to light the way for my ever-wandering heart? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow. A wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you've told me who I am. I am yours. Who am I that the eyes that see my sin will look on me with love and watch me rise again? Who am I that the voice that calmed the sea will call out through the rain and calm the storm in me? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling, won't you catch me when I'm falling? You told me who I am, I am yours. Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling, won't you catch me when I'm falling? And you told me who I am, I am yours, I am yours, I am yours.
Good morning, church. It's been a long time since you've last heard from me. As many of you know, I have been on a 3-month sabbatical. I'd like to begin by thanking the leadership, the MC, and many of you who have encouraged me to go on this break. Being away from church work for so long, it's not something that I've been used to after 27 years. In fact, it took me more than a month into my sabbatical to feel completely detached from ministry work. Many of you, out of the kindness of your heart, out of your love and concern, have encouraged me to do this for some time now, and I want to thank you. I want to especially thank my wife, who has been ever so ready to shoulder the responsibility of the house, the family, the church, and constantly telling me and encouraging me, go on a break, go somewhere else, and enjoy yourself. I'm so grateful to all of you for all the love and concern that I receive. I feel really blessed. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'd like to share something today that I've learned from my own Bible study that has really encouraged me, inspired me about how amazing our God is. And I hope you'll do the same for all of you. The title of today's message is God's Voice of Comfort. And we will begin our sermon by reading 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1 to 5. 1 Samuel 21, verse 1 to 5, it reads, David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, Why are you alone? Why is no one with you? David answered Ahimelech the priest, The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, No one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. David replied, Indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual whenever I set out. The men's things are holy even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. David was already a national hero by this time. He saved Israel from utter humiliation at the hands of Goliath and the Philistine army. He had led several successful campaigns for Saul and won against their enemies. David was so successful that people on the streets were cheering, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. He has also married the king's daughter, and he was best friends with the king's son, Jonathan. You could say that everything was fantastic for David at this point. Everything was going swimmingly. Wonderful for the career of this young man. That was until his king decided it's time for him to die. By this time, Saul had attempted to kill David 3 times already. So you can imagine how David must have been feeling. I've done all these great things for God and for my country, and yet I'm being pursued like a dog. Jonathan found it hard to believe that his father would actually want to kill David, so he made a pact with David that he was going to find out if that was true. To his dismay and disappointment in his father, he realized that Saul really wanted to end David's life. So he gave a signal and bid farewell to to David, and told him, it's time for you to flee. So here he was, a national hero, running for his life. So he ran, and naturally he ran to perhaps the only city he felt safe in, and it was Nob, the city of priests. Because by this time, David probably was struggling with knowing whom he could trust. He could not tell who was going to be loyal to Saul, was going to capture him and hand him over to Saul. And you could also tell that when he was in the presence of the priest, he still wasn't very sure if he could trust the priest. The priest was shocked to see David. The Bible says that he trembled. And we can guess that he probably got news that Saul had been trying to kill David, and so he was wondering, what is David doing here? So David came up with a story that he was on a secret mission, and the reason no one has heard about why he was in Nob, not even the priest, is because Saul has sent him on a secret mission and he could not tell anyone about it. And he's got his men who was ready to meet him at some point, and that's why he was alone. These were all, of course, a lie. On top of that, David was hungry. And the only food that was available was the bread of the presence that had been removed from the sanctuary. This is a bread that is baked and then placed in the sanctuary for 7 days and changed every Sabbath. And when it is replaced by new bread, the old one is then taken out and can only be eaten by priests. David took the bread. He was so desperate, so hungry. Of course, by right, David was not supposed to eat the bread. So here we see David lying to a high priest, eating bread that he was not supposed to eat. Wasn't David supposed to be a man after God's own heart? Was he not supposed to be a man of courage? I mean, what happened to the boy who killed the lion and the bear when they came after his father's sheep? He was so bold. I mean, I cannot even imagine confronting a wild animal, much less a bear and a lion. This guy did it. And then on a battlefield, his responsibility that day was to bring food for his brothers. He overheard this giant shouting and laughing at the army of Israel. And he was surrounded by hundreds of men who were trained for battle. And none of these trained soldiers, warriors, had the courage to step up to face Goliath. And here he was, a teenage boy at that time, enraged by the taunting of this Philistine, and felt like he was insulting God and his army, and decided that, you know what, I'm not going to stand for that. And he alone stood facing this 9 feet tall giant, only with a sling and a stone. His only reference was, God is going to give me victory against Goliath, just like how he had given me victory over the bear and the lion. Man, you would think that here is David. If that was who he was when he was a teenager, now he's 20 years old. He should be even more incredible. His faith would be even greater than ever before. Man after God's own heart, a man of courage. What happened? Where is that David? This guy told a blatant lie. He ate the bread of the presence that he was not supposed to. Where is the David that we know? How come our David was so weak and fearful? I think David's life is there to teach us that there will come a time in everyone's lives, even the most spiritual, when you will lose faith, lose direction, lose courage. This shows that we will not always have the strength to overcome everything in our lives. Human might can only carry us so far. No matter how strong and spiritual you are, there are some distances that you just can't go by your own strength. And as strong as David was, he was going through a lot. Here are some of the struggles he was probably facing at this point. David was struggling with a lot of fear. I mean, how could he not? He was nearly killed a few times now. He was also struggling with a sense of betrayal. I mean, it's one thing to be pursued by your enemies, but by your own king, whom you serve wholeheartedly, obviously you feel betrayed. David was also feeling a lot of grief. The Bible says that when him and Jonathan parted, they both wept, but David cried the most. We can only imagine the pain, the hurt that he must have been going through at this point. On top of that, the anger at the injustice, that this is not fair. It's obviously not fair for David. And also feeling lost. I think for the first time in David's life, he was no longer sure about God's will. Suddenly, God, whom he has always felt had his back, always supported him, probably for the first time, he was no longer sure if God wanted him. I think nothing is worse than the last one that he was battling with, feeling of being lost. Where do I stand with God? It's one thing to be confused about where I stand with men, but where do I stand with God? Why is God allowing all these things to happen to me? You see, brothers and sisters, sometimes it is easy for us to read about David's life and watch him lying through his teeth and then doing something unlawful like eating the bread of the presence and go like, David, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And then we can be critical and say, oh, he should have done this. Why did he do that? Why didn't he do this? Why? We can get critical. But if there's one thing I appreciate about God and His Word is that God is never shy about sharing with us the strengths and the weaknesses of His children. You know, God makes no attempts to hide the failures, even of his heroes. God shows us they are not superhumans and they are not always strong. God was not ashamed to be called their God. Yes, God was not ashamed to be called David's God. Yes, the David who failed miserably at this point, who gave in to his fear, who lost his faith, who sinned. He told a lie. He told a lie to the high priest. You can't go higher than that. He ate the bread of the presence. And yet when God wrote about them, people like David and all the other guys who had massive failures in their life, weaknesses exposed, God says, I'm so proud to be their God. I love what God says in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 16b and verse 32. It says, therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. God never abandons his people, even when they fail. Unless the people chose to abandon God, telling God, we no longer want you. But God will never leave his children, even when they fall, even when they fail. That shouldn't sound strange to us, because I have children, and I'm very, very grateful and feel really blessed that all my children have made their own decisions to follow God, to be his disciples. But like all of us, they have their strengths and weaknesses. They have their victories and they also have their failures. What would it have been like if each time they fail or they fall, all I do is to be there to say, you should have done this or you should have done that. You should have gone this way, but you didn't. Or I told you so. Jane and I, as much as we try to be the best parents we could be, we obviously have made mistakes before. But as far as we have learned, we are told that we should always be there for our children through thick and thin. When Sabrina was much younger, her orthodontist told her that she needed to wear a rubber silicone brace to bed every night. It cost several hundred ringgit. So she would bring it to bed and wear it, but in the middle of the night, it would slip out of her mouth. And that's usually fine because the next day you find it on the bed, you wash it and then you use it again. But Sabrina has a dog, as many of you know, Kaylee. So Kaylee is the pet of her life. She loves Kaylee a lot. Kaylee has the privilege of sleeping with Sabrina on a bed every night. A little bit of a pampered dog. So one day I told Sabrina, because Kaylee sleeps with her, I think it's better that she no longer sleeps on the bed, because she might find the silicone brace one night and chew on it. And I was concerned about that. And Sabrina assured me, oh, Dad, it has happened before and she has never touched my brace. And of course she loves sleeping with a dog. So she gave me the assurance, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna let her make the decision. But of course I had some concern in my heart. So sometime later, I was awoken one morning by loud screams coming from Sabrina's room. So I jumped out of my bed, ran to the room, half suspecting what had happened. Sure enough, Sabrina was on a bed crying and scolding her dog because the brace had come out of her mouth in the middle of the night, and Kaylee had decided to use it as a chew toy, and it was completely destroyed. I held on to Sabrina to comfort her, and she just said, Daddy, I'm sorry. And she was weeping, felt really broken about it. You know, that was an I told you so moment. If there was a time to say that, it would have been that. You see, I told you this would happen. You didn't listen, and look at what has happened to the brace. It cost several hundred ringgit. But you know, I didn't say all that. I just comforted her and gave her the assurance that it's okay. You see, I come from the background where the family believes in this mantra that I told you so. In fact, the belief is that if you don't scold, they will never learn. So you gotta scold. And many of us come from such similar backgrounds. But you know, when I looked at my daughter, she was already so torn up, so broken by what happened. Was it necessary for me to add any more pain? Should I not have been there to provide comfort? And that's something that was not natural for me. I needed to learn to refrain myself, to go against every vibe in my body, to not say I told you so, but to be there when she was at her lowest. And so many of us with this, who grew up with this background, we're so used to feeling shame, guilt, pain. And what do most of us do when the shame, the guilt, the pain comes? We learn to hide. We learn to run away. We learn to fight back, perhaps. We try to do whatever it takes to ignore it, to push it aside. And the more we do that, the more we appear that we are not broken. We're not sorry. So it makes people think and ask us, are you guilty? And sometimes in our defense to not feel the pain, to not feel the shame, we go, no. Are you not sorry? And we go, sorry about what? So we come up with these coping mechanisms to hide all the shame and the pain on the inside. But just like the man in the picture, our head is actually in the ground. We try to get away, as far away as possible from the place of shame, because we think it makes us look weak. This becomes a vicious cycle. And for many of us, we've been trapped in this cycle for many years. And we bring this into our relationship with God. That when we fail, when we sin, when we fall, we hide from God. We run away from Him. We create some distance. We feel we're so unworthy. Oh, God must be so disappointed in me, must be so mad. When actually it's all the voices that we've been used to hearing all of our lives. That's the vicious cycle. And I don't want my children to grow up living that kind of life. That was my life. That's the life that many of us struggle with. I had to be intentional about showing grace and mercy because it was not naturally in me. If I could shower my daughter with grace and mercy, how much more God, who is a far better father than any of us, if we were to come before Him with guilt, with sorrow and remorse. And with God, He didn't need to be intentional. It comes to Him naturally. He wants to show us mercy and grace because God is a better father than any of us. I made sure that Sabrina heard and received my assurance because I didn't want her to carry the burden of guilt and fear. And you know, the closer she is to me, the clearer my voice of assurance would be to her. The closer we are to God, the clearer and the louder is His voice of comfort, grace, and mercy to us. the better we are at receiving the Word of God and His voice. Sometimes we cannot pick up on God's voice, words of assurance, not because He's not showing us grace and mercy, but sometimes it's because we have distanced ourselves. When we have fallen, we have not made the effort to go back quickly to God, back to His arms of comfort. The longer we distance ourselves from God, the more unfamiliar His voice becomes to us. That even when God reaches out to us, we don't pick up the frequency. It doesn't register with us. And when the voice of God is drowned out or fades with this distance, it's taken over by the voice of the devil, the voice of the world. And if you are burdened by the sin of guilt and shame, these voices are not there to relieve you. Rather, they are there to prolong the guilt and the shame and the pain until you're completely crushed by them. If you're guilty, the voice also say, good, you should be. Fearful? Yeah, but you should be, you rotten sinner. Burden? You brought it on yourself. When you really tune in, when we really tune into the voice of God, it is amazing how different it sounds from these voices that we hear constantly. The guilty, the burden, the ones that are beaten down, these are the ones that Jesus called out to and said, come to me. Look at what Jesus said in Matthew 11, verse 28 to verse 30. Then Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. What a difference it is to hear the real voice of God. It's a voice of comfort. Because Jesus I know it's tough. It's not easy. That's why I'm here for you. And all we need to do, Jesus says, you should come to me. Not when you're not carrying burdens of anything. Come to me when you're burdened. God is telling us we should go to Him. It's a voice of comfort, not condemnation. You see, brothers and sisters, that is like our daily quiet time. Every day setting aside time just so that I can go to God, to hear His voice of comfort. And you and I know we need to hear God's voice of comfort. If you and I tune in to the voice of God every single day, it will become more and more familiar to us. And what does it take for us to do that? It takes 45 minutes to an hour to have our prayer and our Bible study. Of course, if you want to, you can spend more time than that. But generally, if you spend 45 minutes to an hour just to tune in to the voice of God, does that really take up a lot? 45 minutes to an hour. That's not even the length of one movie in a cinema. That's not even the length of one football match. Surely, we can afford to do that. Some of us spend more time on Shopee or Lazada than that in one sitting. Surely we can set aside that amount of time to tune in to the voice of God. Why live with this unhealthy, heavy burden when Jesus has told us to come to Him because He wants to relieve us of that? There is nothing like hearing the voice of God and be comforted by our Father in heaven. David failed miserably. Yet God said, I'm proud of you. Because David never gave up. Neither should we give up on going to God. Let's tune in to our Father's voice and hear His voice of comfort every day. Amen.